we're going to come over and take a look at it.
Copy that.
All right, this is rapidly becoming very ugly.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, this isn't looking good.
In the past 5 years, millions of acres of California have been consumed by wildfires. And in 2018, with the massive Woolsey fire menacing northern Los Angeles County itself, local news choppers took to the air to cover every smoky second.
And then that provides a great deal of fuel for these fires.
But when some viewers saw this footage, they forgot all about the flames.
So the helicopter captures this massive cloud of smoke billowing up from the forest. And then all of a sudden, out of the cloud, comes this odd little shape. It's narrow, almost looks like a flat saucer on its side or a cigar shape.
Journalist MJ Banias covers the unexplained, and he says the cigar-shaped UFO is a classic type, right up there with orbs, tic-tacs, and triangles.
Cigar-shaped UFOs have been seen for decades, if not centuries, and we have lots of recordings of them. We have lots of witness testimony of them. We have lots of photographs of them. So for the UFO community, seeing a cigar-shaped UFO, it was pretty compelling.
The video caught fire online. Was a UFO somehow drawn to the flames?
There's a belief that UFOs use clouds as cover and they hide behind them. I've heard stories that UFOs can actually shapeshift and look like clouds. I've also heard that UFOs enjoy frequenting sites of great devastation, forest fires included.
Here's an interesting fact. More than 80% of U.S. forest fires are started by human activity, from cigarettes to arson. Could it be that UFOs are somehow drawn to these large fires? Let's break down the video with our experts. First off, we know the video is real. It was broadcast live by a news chopper, and you can see from the independent motion of the object that it's not just a smudge on the lens. So could it have been an object from outer space entering the Earth's atmosphere? We asked the video expert Mark D'Antonio, a trained astronomer.
Sometimes meteors will come in, and sometimes they hit the atmosphere at such a low angle that they can't crash, and they just go skipping off the Earth. And as they do that, they start to burn up.
But the California UFO wasn't burning up. And science writer Mick West, who's lived through plenty of wildfires, says it couldn't be a plane.
It didn't seem to have any of the features of a plane. It had no visible wings, and it seemed to be moving either too slow or to be too big to be a plane.
Set on solving this puzzle, West starts by determining precisely where the news chopper was.
I looked up all the helicopters in the Flight Radar 24 tracking service and tried to figure out where they all were at that time. Then I went into Google Earth and I positioned the camera where these helicopters were at around that time.
Using some satellite images of the fire, West is able to line up that image with the chopper's exact camera angle.
So I could tell that the chopper's over here, we're looking over here.
Then, the eureka moment.
And you can see here we're looking down, so it's all ocean.
That's right. The sky is really the Pacific Ocean. And the cigar-shaped UFO?
What if it was a boat that's actually out on the ocean?
West checks the local shipping lanes, and sure enough,
15 miles off the coast is the route that all the container ships take when they're going north and south off the coast of California. So what we were looking at was a container ship.
the moral of the story? Check your assumptions. That blue sky might turn out to be the blue ocean. And our verdict? That UFO turned out to be an unidentified floating object, a container ship. It's May 2020 in Calahorra, Spain. A local man named Juan Carlos Gil Lopez is walking through a nearby park on a bright spring day. Suddenly, he sees something so utterly mind-bending, he immediately has to film it to make sure he's not hallucinating. A line of fire is moving steadily across the ground. As it burns, it leaves behind green, undamaged grass. Look closely. The fire reaches benches and eventually trees, but none of that seems to burn. Juan was understandably stunned.
Yo no recuerdo que hubiera pasado una cosa parecida a esta en esta zona. Entonces, pues bueno, fue bastante chocante y bastante impactante el ver pues cómo avanzaba el fuego y pues eso, cómo ardía.
Humans are naturally fascinated by fire. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism developed to make us aware of these dangers from out of the womb. So there's a reason we're mesmerized by images like this Texas tree burning from inside and this downright devilish fire tornado seen in the UK in 2018. Is what Juan captured a similar freak of nature, or was it planned? The US government regularly starts fires on purpose. These so-called controlled burns are meant to protect communities, restore habitats, and even control pests. Maybe that's what's going on here. In the US, 6.4 million acres were subject to controlled burns in 2017 alone. Is the Spanish government doing something similar here? Maybe it's just another video hoax. In case of emergency, break class and call in the experts. First, video forensics expert Michael Primo runs a test to make sure this isn't actually digital manipulation.
When we were assessing the digital integrity of the file itself, there was a signature that came up using our forensic tool called Medex that has the ability to make changes to a file.
While that sounds like a red flag, Primo digs deeper.
Although this tool can make changes to a file, we didn't detect any evidence that this fire was created unnaturally in the video, and no evidence to support that this was CGI.
We turn to atmospheric scientist Dr. Deanna Hens to find out if conditions in this region of Spain would sustain a fire like this.
Well, I looked at the climate conditions around the time that this video was filmed. In this particular region, it was actually quite wet. There was plenty of moisture in the environment through rainfall that could account for why everything was so green and lush. And because the fire is moving very quickly, that doesn't really leave a lot of time for the objects around it to dry out and then catch on fire.
That explains why the grass and trees and benches don't ignite. But how would such a strangely shaped fire form in the first place? Our all-star physicist Michio Kaku shed some light on the matter.
We don't have that much direct experience with large fires. And if you did, you would realize flames go in the direction where you have lots of oxygen, lots of tinder, and lots of surface area.
Kaku explains that the white discoloration in the grass in the front of the flames is actually the fluffy seeds of the poplar trees around the park. That's what is actually catching fire and why the narrow flame is moving so fast.
Notice here that the poplars are burning because that's where you have maximum surface area. The first things to burn will be those places where we have maximum surface area.
In fact, the same principle that causes these poplar seeds to burn so quickly also applies in your own home.
That's why a newspaper burns very fast, while a log in a fireplace will take a lot of time for it to heat up, because a newspaper, for a given weight, has a maximum amount of surface area.
So, our verdict. While this mesmerizing fire appears to act mysteriously and contrary to nature, its bizarre behavior is actually an idiosyncrasy of environment and physics. Officials at this park believe the fire was started unintentionally from a cigarette or other stray spark.
Pretty much total destruction. I've seen every house destroyed on this road.
California wildfires have become a perennial disaster. In the aftermath, aerial footage shows wrenching images of destruction.
Here we see the devastating after effects of what these wildfires are leaving in their wake.
But look closely at this shot. Does something seem off to you?
One of the things that we're seeing that is absolutely crazy are entire houses incinerated, burned to the ground, while trees surrounding them are completely left intact, untouched. The question is, what is causing these wildfires?
Let's zoom in on that. It does seem odd that the trees are standing while the houses are reduced to ash. Journalist MJ Banaya says images like these have prompted some wild explanations that are getting attention online.
According to internet conspiracy theories, there's a secret government program known as Agenda 21, the purpose of which is to force people to relocate into major cities. And then, as the conspiracy theory goes, the government can then exercise more control over the population.
And how is this allegedly being accomplished? Forest fires and laser guns.
The theory is that the US government was using direct energy weapons to purposefully start these forest fires to clear out towns or for some other nefarious reason.
Laser weapons are much more than staples of science fiction. During the Cold War, the US and USSR poured resources into orbital space weapons, even deploying some. The so-called Star Wars missile defense system was the most famous, but perhaps the most intriguing was the Air Force's YAL-1, which featured a laser system mounted in a turret on a plane's nose. And that's just the technology we know about. As you know, the US military did just launch Space Force. But could the government really be using secret energy weapons to start fires and control society? We turn to our military expert, Tim McMillan, for an explanation.
The idea of directed energy weapons. It's very exciting. I mean, we've heard about that since Star Trek.
Tim says it's true that the major space powers are all developing energy weapons to take out each other's satellites. But striking the Earth's surface?
That is something that's very difficult to achieve and not technically, that we know of, achievable. Whenever the laser is being projected down, it's got to travel through the atmosphere, clouds. Any one of these factors are going to cause what's called atmospheric blooming. And by the time it reaches Earth, it's not going to have the amount of energy to start a fire and burn something.
So if a laser weapon is not possible, then what can account for the strange aftermath footage? Science writer Mick West, who lives in wildfire country, says it's simple. Houses burn much easier than trees.
It's actually quite hard to burn green wood.
To demonstrate, West decides to do his own test.
I went into my attic and I got a piece of scrap wood. Then I went out into the field behind my house and I cut down a branch of a tree. And then I took both of these pieces of wood and I put them in my fire and I built identical piles of kindling under each one. And then I lit them both at the same time. The wood from my attic caught fire and burned partway through. The wood that I just cut from a tree just got a bit black on the outside, just got a bit sooty, even though they had the exact same small fires underneath, which shows that green wood doesn't burn, but the wood in your house does.
In fact, the average live tree is about 50% water by weight. And while theories about directed energy weapons aren't going to go away anytime soon, that fact leads us to our unequivocal verdict. These fires are natural phenomena. August 2020, it's rush hour on a stormy day in Xinjiang City in northeast China. A motorist has his camera focused on a large residential building that is under construction. Suddenly, we see something flying into the frame, towards and then behind the building. Suddenly, the building is engulfed in a massive fireball. Let's see that again. The object appears to be a huge flying creature of some sort. As the flash recedes, we see the flying object continue its path away from the building, which amazingly remains intact. Once the video goes viral, it sparks wild internet speculation about fire-breathing dragons.
When we're faced with a video that suggests that something like a dragon flew over China and breathed fire, so many people are willing to jump on that bandwagon. That says a lot about human beings, both good and bad.
Modern-day encounters with what some feel are flying dinosaurs like the pterosaur, which boasted a 30-foot wingspan, are not uncommon in some parts of the world.
I've interviewed dozens of eyewitnesses who swear that they've seen these living pterosaur creatures flying around in modern times. In Papua New Guinea, they're known as the ropin.
The ropin, also known as the demon flyer, is said to be a monstrous creature that's terrified the natives of Papua New Guinea, which is further south on the Pacific Rim than China. In 1986, a man was even said to have been killed by a ropin and eaten in front of his fellow villagers.
While it seems highly improbable that these animals could still be around, there are many sightings and accounts, and I think we can't totally rule out the possibility.
But even if we entertain the notion that this could be a relic pterosaur, that wouldn't explain the massive explosion. Some internet sleuths put forward another theory involving secret Chinese laser weapons. As recently as July of 2021, a research team in Shanghai announced they had achieved a technological breakthrough that will allow them to build the most powerful laser on the planet. Remember, we have two questions to answer here. Not only what caused that big flash, but what was that thing we see in the air? And just so you know, we tried tracking down whoever shot the video with no luck, which is always reason to ask if the footage is even real. So, our experts have plenty to sort out. Let's get to it. Our wildlife biologist, Dr. Stephanie Schuttler, considers whether or not the flying dino theory has wings.
It doesn't seem to be actively flying. It seems to be gliding. We don't really see any movement of the wings at all.
Dr. Schuttler also notices another key detail when she zooms in on the image.
And it doesn't seem to have like a center body shape at all. So I don't think it's an animal of any sort. It could be like a piece of tarp or a very big piece of plastic or something like that floating in the wind.
So the flying object is confounding us so far, but what about the flash? Maybe it's separate from the object. Our military expert, Tim McMillan, addresses the theory that it's from a space-based laser, maybe a test.
Some of the challenges that any type of laser is going to face is atmospheric refraction. In this video, we see rain, we see haze, fog. All of that is going to greatly reduce any energy any type of laser is going to have. And so you're not going to get an explosion from a laser. So I can say we're not looking at a laser weapon here.
Interesting fact, it was just announced that the U.S. is developing a laser weapon to shoot down the new Chinese hypersonic missiles we mentioned earlier. But that would be used in space, where atmospheric refraction isn't a factor. So it all comes down to video forensic expert Michael Primo. He notices that the flying object seems to have passed the building before the fireball.
Based on this flight path alone, it does not appear that this object created or caused this explosion in this way.
Primo also finds a telltale sign that the video may have been doctored.
At frame 8740, there is a white flash that occurs across the whole screen right before the alleged explosion. So this appears to be a spot where whoever created this recording intentionally avoided the opportunity to see an edit to deceive the viewer.
After further analysis, we also uncovered a report released by Chinese state media that cites the cause of the massive fireball as a random bolt of lightning striking a high-voltage power line near an unfinished residential compound. So, we know what caused the flash. It was lightning striking nearby power lines. That doesn't explain what was flying around before the lightning strike. But thanks to our ace forensic video expert, we're confident declaring that part of the video a pianju. That's Chinese for hoax.